The call came out of nowhere, the way bad news usually does. Quiet, unannounced, slipping past your guard when you're convinced the day has already shown you everything it has. I was standing in my kitchen in Santa Mesa, rinsing out a chipped mug I'd owned longer than my son had been alive, when my phone vibrated against the counter. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. At 70, you learn that most surprises aren't gifts. Mr. Reynolds? The voice was low, careful. Male. Young, but tired in a way youth shouldn't be. Yes. This is Colin. I was the photographer at your son's wedding. A pause, then softer. Sir, you need to see something. And I'd ask you not to tell your son yet. Those last words landed heavier than the rest. Not tell your son yet. Men who've lived long enough know when a sentence is carrying more than it says. My hand tightened around the phone. I asked the only question that mattered. Is Michael all right? Yes, he said quickly. Your son is fine. But what I found isn't. I told him I'd come. Before I go on, let me say this. If you're here listening, it means more than you know. Some stories sit heavy on the heart, and sharing them feels lighter when someone's beside you. Tell me where you're listening from. And if these lessons speak to you, consider subscribing. It helps an old man keep telling the truth, one story at a time. My name is Arthur Reynolds. I'm 70 years old. Retired shop teacher. Hands rough from decades of guiding teenagers through sawdust, splinters, and mistakes that could be fixed if you slowed down and paid attention. I live alone now. My wife Linda passed 10 years ago, and since then life has settled into routines. Quiet mornings, coffee on the porch, lemon trees casting uneven shadows across cracked concrete like they've given up on perfection. Michael is my only child, an engineer in Phoenix. Steady, honest, the kind of man who still calls every Sunday because he promised his mother he would. You don't break promises in this family, not if you were raised right. When he told me he was getting married, I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was still tight. Lauren Hayes, he said. Smart, confident, worked in finance. When I met her, she smiled easily and spoke about investments the way I spoke about wood grain, like it told you the truth if you knew how to read it. She looked at my son like the world made sense when he walked into a room. For a widower who prayed his boy would be loved well, that was enough. The wedding was beautiful. Scottsdale garden, lanterns glowing like borrowed stars. I wore the suit Linda picked out years ago, felt her presence and the weight of it on my shoulders. I watched my son blink back tears as Lauren walked toward him, and I thought, we did good. I believed that. For months, I believed that. Colin's studio was dim when I arrived. No music, no small talk. He slid his laptop across the table and said, just look. The first image froze my breath in place. Lauren, still in her wedding gown, not with my son. And in that moment, I understood something terrible was beginning, but I had no idea yet how deep the cut would go. The man beside her wasn't Michael. That was the first clear thought that settled in my head, sharp and unmistakable, the way a carpenter knows when a board is warped before he even measures it. Lauren stood near a service hallway, half-shadowed, her body angled toward a man in a dark suit. His hand rested at the small of her back, familiar and possessive. Not a cousin's touch, not a colleague's. The kind of touch you give when you think no one is watching. I didn't move, didn't speak. Years of teaching had trained me to wait, to observe before reacting. Colin clicked forward. Another photo. Different angle. Same hallway. Lauren's head tilted slightly. Her expression softened in a way I'd never seen directed at my son. The timestamp blinked in the corner. During the reception. During my toast. That's not Michael, I said quietly. No, sir, Colin replied. His name is Ethan Ward. He didn't rush. He let the images speak. Lauren slipping away during speeches. Ethan following minutes later. Lauren returning. Hair smoothed in a hurry. Lipstick reapplied with practiced precision. The pattern was unmistakable once you stopped wanting it to be something else. How long? I asked. Colin hesitated. Years. Before the wedding. After. During. I leaned back in the chair. My chest didn't explode with anger the way movies pretend it should. It tightened instead, slow and deliberate, like a clamp being set in place. Then Colin opened a different folder. This wasn't wedding photography. Bank filings. Business registrations. Wire transfers. Names highlighted in yellow. Mostly older names. Retirees. Widows. People who'd spent a lifetime building something small and honest. They run an investment firm together, Colin said. Private opportunities. High-yield promises. They target people who trust easily. His voice faltered. My mother was one of them. She lost everything. Her savings. Her house. She died thinking she failed herself. Silence filled the room, thick and unmoving. And me? I asked. He met my eyes. From what I can tell, you were next. That was the moment the fog lifted. Lauren hadn't married my son for love. She married him for proximity. For access. Michael was the doorway. I was the vault. My hands folded together on my lap. They were steady. Does my son know? I asked. No. Good, I said. He deserves one more night of peace. Colin watched me carefully, like he expected shouting or collapse. Instead, I stood. Show me everything, I said. Every document. Every timeline. Every pattern. Because when a man has already buried the love of his life, betrayal doesn't shatter him. It sharpens him. And as the screen filled again with proof, numbers, dates, smiling faces now stripped of innocence, I understood something most people learn too late. Silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And mine had just begun. I didn't drive straight home after leaving Colin's studio. That would have been a mistake. When your mind is flooded, you don't go back to quiet places expecting them to hold you together. Instead, I pulled into a small diner off Bell Road, the kind that still serves coffee in thick white mugs and doesn't ask questions. I sat alone in a corner booth, hands wrapped around heat I didn't feel. The waitress asked if I wanted food. I said no. She nodded like she understood men who weren't hungry for the right reasons. I kept seeing Michael at the altar. The way his hands trembled when he lifted Lauren's veil. The trust in his eyes. Trust is a sacred thing. You don't borrow it. You don't fake it. And you sure as hell don't weaponize it. By the time I got home, the sun was already dropping behind the lemon trees. The house felt heavier than it had that morning, like the walls had learned something new and weren't sure how to hold it yet. I didn't turn on the lights. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, same as always, and stood there longer than usual, listening to the familiar creaks of a house that had outlived most of my illusions. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the drawer where Linda used to keep her stationery. I pulled out a yellow legal pad instead. Old habit. When things went wrong in the shop, you didn't panic. You wrote things down. Names. Dates. Questions. Why had Lauren asked so many times about my pension last Thanksgiving? Why had she insisted on walking me through estate planning ideas I hadn't requested? Why had she smiled just a second too long when I mentioned the paid-off house? Patterns don't announce themselves. They wait for you to stop lying to yourself. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Love you, Dad. Just landed back in Phoenix. Lauren says hi. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally, I wrote, love you too, son. Call me tomorrow. Sometimes love means not unloading truth like a weapon. Sometimes it means standing between the blade and the person you raised until the timing is right. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The ceiling fan spun slow above me, each rotation marking another thought I couldn't quiet. I remembered Michael as a boy in my workshop, too eager, too careless, always wanting to rush to the finished piece. Linda would smile and say, he'll learn. He had learned. Just not this lesson. Sometime after midnight, I sat up in bed. The heaviness in my chest had shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It was resolve. Clean. Focused. Lauren thought she was smart. And maybe she was. But she'd made one mistake people like her always make. She underestimated quiet men. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. No alarm. Just that internal pull that tells you it's time to stop feeling and start doing. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, watching dawn creep across the floor like a promise. I picked up the phone and called Colin. "I'm ready," I said. There was a pause, then a breath I could hear through the line. "Good," he replied, because I wasn't planning to do this alone either. That was when I learned this wasn't just about my family anymore. And that knowledge changed everything. We met 2 days later at a cafe just outside Phoenix, the kind of place wedged between a dry cleaner and a tire shop, where the coffee tastes burnt but the conversations stay private. I arrived early again, sat with my back to the wall. Old habits don't fade just because you retire. Colin wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, posture straight, eyes calm in a way that told me she'd seen panic often enough not to fear it. She stood when I approached. "Arthur Reynolds," she said. "Detective Renee Porter. Financial crimes. Elder exploitation." Those 2 words settled into me without shock. Confirmation has a way of doing that. She didn't waste time. Spread folders across the table. Timelines. Shell companies. Wire paths that looped through 3 states and 2 countries before landing where no one could easily trace them. Lauren and Ethan weren't improvising. They were methodical. Professional. "She's careful," Porter said. "But careful people get sloppy when they think they're winning." "And she thinks she is," I replied. Colin slid an envelope toward me. Inside were screenshots of messages Lauren had sent him after the wedding. Casual. Confident. Talking about expansion, about new capital, about older family members who trust Michael completely. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Porter leaned in slightly. "Mr. Reynolds, based on what we have, we believe she intends to move your assets next. Pension, home equity, anything liquid." I nodded once. "What do you need from me?" She studied me, likely deciding whether grief would make me reckless. Instead, she found a man who'd taught teenagers not to rush a cut unless they wanted to ruin the wood. "We need you to let her think the plan is working," she said. "Let her talk. Let her over-explain. Let her document her own guilt." Silence again. Then I said, "I can do that." On the drive home, the desert stretched wide and indifferent around me. That night, I didn't pace. I didn't drink. I opened a fresh notebook at the desk where Linda used to sign birthday cards, and Michael learned to balance his first checkbook. I wrote down every interaction Lauren and I had ever had. The questions she asked. The compliments she layered with concern. The way she framed suggestions as favors. Predators don't lunge. They circle. I called Michael later that evening. We talked about nothing. Weather. Work. A new project he was excited about. I told him I was proud of him. And I meant it with everything I had. After we hung up, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and rested my hand on the frame. Linda used to say doorways matter. They mark transitions. "This is for him," I whispered into the quiet house. "Always for him." Lauren texted the next morning. "Arthur, I've been thinking about your retirement. We should talk soon." I stared at the message, felt no anger, no fear, only certainty. I typed back, "Of course, whenever you think is best." And somewhere in Phoenix, she smiled, convinced the door had opened. She had no idea she'd just stepped into a room with no exits. Lauren suggested lunch. Neutral ground, she called it. A quiet place where we could talk comfortably. I agreed, because predators relax when they think they're choosing the terrain. The restaurant sat on a corner in downtown Phoenix, all glass and polished concrete. Menus without prices, waitstaff trained to disappear. She arrived 5 minutes late on purpose. Power move, I noticed. She kissed my cheek like family and slid into the chair across from me, setting her phone face down on the table as if she had nothing to hide. "Arthur," she said warmly, "I'm so glad you're open to this." I smiled the way men my age do when we've already measured the room. "You sounded concerned." She nodded, brows knitting just enough to suggest care. "I am. Michael worries about you. We both do. Retirement can be complicated." There it was. Michael worries. We both do. She spoke like she was easing me toward a chair I hadn't asked to sit in. She talked for 10 minutes straight. About market volatility. About inefficiencies in traditional pensions. About opportunities overseas that people our age rarely get access to. She framed everything as protection, safety, legacy, and your house, she added casually, stirring her drink. It's such a large portion of your net worth. Have you ever considered repositioning that equity? I leaned back slightly. Repositioning, she smiled. Leveraging, nothing dramatic, just smart. I asked questions, slow ones, simple ones, the kind that invite explanation. She obliged gladly. Confidence makes people careless. She used phrases like temporary transfers and rolling capital. She spoke about returns without explaining risk. And when I asked where the returns came from, she laughed softly and said, from growth. Growth is a word that hides a lot of rot. I nodded, took notes, let her feel in control. At the end, she slid a slim folder across the table. Just preliminary authorizations, she said. No commitment yet. I didn't open it. I like to think things over, I replied. She reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over mine. Of course you do. That's why we trust you. Trust. The word almost made me laugh. That evening, I scanned every page she'd given me and forwarded copies to Detective Porter. She called an hour later. She's getting sloppy, Porter said. This is good. Over the next week, Lauren called often, texted more, always polite, always encouraging. She asked about my health, my sleep, whether I'd talked to Michael lately. Each question was a probe, checking how much access she still had. I gave her just enough. Meanwhile, Porter and her team moved quietly. Warrants prepared, accounts monitored. Colin handed over everything he had, including messages Lauren had sent him boasting about closing the old man soon. The phrase didn't hurt the way it might have earlier. I'd already mourned the version of myself she thought she was exploiting. The meeting was set for the following Thursday. Her office. Documents ready. Signatures expected. The night before, I stood on my porch and watched the sky darken behind the lemon trees. I felt calm. Not numb. Calm. Some men mistake calm for surrender. Lauren was about to learn the difference. And so was my son. Thursday morning arrived clear and bright, the kind of Arizona day that tricks you into believing nothing bad can happen under a sky that honest. I woke early, pressed a shirt, polished shoes I didn't strictly need to polish. Not vanity. Armor. Dignity shows before words ever do. Lauren's office sat on the second floor of a glass building downtown. All shine. No soul. Fake plants. Abstract art meant to impress rather than comfort. I arrived 10 minutes early. She hated that. People who like control prefer others to wait. She greeted me with a smile too rehearsed to be spontaneous. Arthur, she said brightly, I'm proud of you for taking this step. Interesting choice of words. Proud. As if I were a child finally behaving. She guided me into a small conference room. Papers already laid out. Pens aligned with precision. A bottle of water placed at my seat. Thoughtful. Strategic. We'll just go through everything once more, she said, sitting across from me. Then we'll make it official. I picked up the pen and rolled it between my fingers. Before I sign, I said calmly, I'd like you to explain it again. Slowly. Her eyes lit up. That was mistake number one. She talked about transferring funds overseas temporarily, about cycling investments through private pools, about early returns coming from new capital inflows. And those returns, I asked gently, they come from where exactly? She didn't hesitate. Confidence makes people careless. Initially, from incoming investors, she said. That's how growth phases work. Eventually, everything balances. There it was. Clean. Casual. Recorded. I set the pen down neatly. I think we're done here, I said. Her smile faltered. Excuse me. I won't be signing. Her posture stiffened. Arthur, you agreed to move forward. I agreed to listen. Her voice sharpened. Do you understand what you're risking? I met her eyes. My dignity. And I don't gamble with that. The door opened behind her. Detective Porter stepped in, badge visible, calm as winter. Two uniformed officers followed. Lauren Hayes, Porter said evenly. You're under arrest for financial fraud, elder exploitation, and securities violations. The room went silent. Lauren's face drained, then flushed. You set me up, she spat. I stood slowly. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. As they let her out, she turned once more, eyes sharp with disbelief. You think this ends with me? I didn't answer. Some truths don't need sound to stand tall. Outside, the sun was warm. Not triumphant. Just steady. But the hardest part still waited. Because the next call I had to make was to my son. And there are no rehearsals for breaking your child's heart the right way. I didn't call Michael right away. That might sound cowardly to some people, but timing matters when truth carries weight. You don't drop it on someone like a brick and walk away. You set it down carefully and stay close enough to help them lift it. I drove home in silence, radio off, hands steady on the wheel. The desert looked the same as it always had, wide, indifferent, honest. I envied that. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was low, throwing long shadows across the porch Linda and I had rebuilt together years ago. I sat there for a while, engine off, breathing through the moment like a man about to step into cold water. When I finally went inside, the house felt different again. Lighter somehow. Not relieved, just resolved. Michael called me first. Dad. His voice was casual, unaware. Lauren's not answering her phone. Do you know where she is? That was the moment. No alarms. No sirens. Just a simple question cracking open a life. Sit down, son, I said. This is going to take a minute. There was a pause. I heard the shift, the scrape of a chair. Okay. I told him everything. Not all at once. Not in anger. I walked him through it the way I used to walk students through a bad cut, where it went wrong, why it failed, and how to understand it without blaming yourself. The wedding photos. The firm. The victims. The arrest. He didn't interrupt. Not once. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then I heard it. The sound of a grown man breathing through something breaking quietly inside him. I loved her, he said finally. Not a question. A statement. I know, I replied. That's not a flaw. What did I miss? His voice cracked. How could I not see it? Because you weren't looking for it, I said. You were building a life. People like her depend on that. He exhaled slowly. Is she really that person? Yes, I said. But that doesn't make you foolish. It makes you decent. Another pause. Then, thank you for protecting me. That almost broke me. Over the next few days, the fallout came fast. Lawyers. Statements. News stories that got parts right and parts wrong. Michael flew in and stayed with me. We didn't talk much at first. We didn't need to. Grief doesn't ask for commentary. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. He stared out at the street, jaw tight. She wanted you, he said quietly. More than me. Yes, I answered. And she lost everything trying. He nodded once. I don't want revenge. Good, I said. Neither did I. He looked at me then. Really looked. So what was it? I thought for a moment. Protection. And truth. That night, he slept better than he had in weeks. I could hear it in the even rhythm of his breathing down the hall. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly in the next room, letting wounds close at their own pace. But the story wasn't over yet. Because consequences don't end at handcuffs. They echo. And the echo was just beginning. The days that followed moved strangely, too fast and too slow at the same time. Paperwork multiplied. Phone calls stacked on each other. Michael met with attorneys, answered questions he never imagined he'd have to answer about the woman he married. I stayed close, present but careful not to crowd him. There's a difference between support and pressure, and I'd learned long ago that men heal better when given room to breathe. Lauren didn't try to contact us. Not from jail. Not through intermediaries. That silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. People who regret being caught aren't the same as people who regret what they did. Detective Porter called midweek. We've frozen the accounts, she said. Recovered funds are being traced back to victims. Your exposure is limited. You'll be fine. Fine is a relative term. Financially, yes. Emotionally, there are no refunds. Michael took the news with a nod. Later that night, he sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. I keep replaying things, he said quietly. Conversations. Moments. Trying to spot the lie. You won't, I replied. Not cleanly. Lies don't wear labels. He sighed. I feel stupid. I shook my head. You trusted someone you loved. That's not stupidity. That's courage without armor. He absorbed that in silence. A week later, he went back to Phoenix to sort out his life there. I watched his car disappear down the street, pride and worry mixing in equal measure. Letting your child walk back into the world after it's hurt them never gets easier, no matter their age. The house returned to its quiet rhythm. Coffee, porch, lemon trees leaning toward the sun like they were still deciding which way to grow. I thought often about Linda during those mornings. What she would have said. Probably something simple. You did right. Then a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, written carefully. Inside was a single page. Lauren's handwriting. She didn't apologize. She explained. Childhood. Pressure. Entitlement disguised as survival. She framed herself as a product of circumstances, not choices. At the end, she wrote, I never meant to hurt Michael. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Meaning is cheap when action tells a different story. I didn't show it to my son. Some things are better left unshared. That evening, I sat on the porch longer than usual, listening to the hum of the neighborhood settling in for the night. A young couple walked past, laughing, oblivious to how fragile happiness can be. I didn't envy them. I respected them. Life doesn't end after betrayal. It clarifies. And clarity, I've learned, is a kind of freedom. Still, one thing lingered in my mind. Lauren hadn't acted alone, and the truth has a way of finishing what it starts. Ethan Ward was arrested 3 weeks after Lauren. They found him exactly where men like him always think they're safest, 3 states away, hiding behind paperwork and confidence, convinced he was smarter than consequences. The charges stacked quickly. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, the kind of list that doesn't shorten with time. Detective Porter kept me updated, not out of obligation, but respect. They're unraveling each other, she said during one call. That usually happens when the story was built on greed instead of loyalty. I believed her. Partnerships like theirs don't survive pressure. They were never built to. Michael called me the night the indictment went public. I saw his face on the news, he said. I felt nothing. That's normal, I replied. Your mind already finished grieving. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't hate her. I know. I don't forgive her either. That's okay. People think forgiveness is a finish line. It isn't. It's a personal boundary. You arrive when you arrive, or you don't. The legal process moved forward like all real justice does, slow, procedural, unsatisfying to anyone craving spectacle. Victims were contacted. Statements gathered. Assets clawed back where possible. Some losses would never be recovered. That truth sat heavy with me. I'd been protected. Others hadn't. One afternoon, I received a call from Colin. My mother's house is gone, he said. But the restitution will help. She would have liked knowing the truth came out. She mattered, I said. Yes, he replied. She did. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook I'd kept since this began. Pages filled with names, dates, observations. Evidence of patience. I closed it gently. Some chapters don't need revisiting. Michael visited again that weekend. We worked in the garage together, fixing nothing in particular. Passing tools. Letting silence do the talking. At one point, he stopped and said, You know what scares me the most? What? That if you hadn't been who you are, this could have destroyed me. I met his eyes. then be who you are because of it. He nodded, absorbing that the way sons do when advice finally lands. As the sun set, we sat on the steps, hands dirty, backs tired, feeling something close to peace. Justice hadn't shouted. It hadn't humiliated or burned anything down. It had simply told the truth and stayed standing. And for the first time since the call that started it all, I believed that was enough. But life, as it tends to do, still had one final test waiting quietly around the corner. The trial date was set for late autumn. I didn't plan to attend. That surprised some people. Reporters called. A producer from a local news station left 3 voicemails asking if I wanted to tell my side of the story. I declined every time. I'd already lived it. I didn't need to perform it. Michael went instead. Not out of anger, not for closure, but because facing something directly has a way of shrinking it down to size. When he came back, he didn't say much at first. He made coffee, sat at the table, let the quiet stretch. She looked smaller, he said eventually. Not powerless, just ordinary. That mattered more than he realized. Monsters lose power when you stop mythologizing them. The verdict came a week later. Guilty on all major counts. Sentencing deferred, but the outcome inevitable. Restitution ordered where possible. Public record sealed my son's name from further association. That part one was grateful for. I took a walk that evening, down streets I'd known for decades. Same cracked sidewalks. Same neighbors waving without needing context. The park clock still didn't run right. No one had ever fixed it. I like that about this place. Time didn't need to be perfect, to be honest. When I got home, there was a letter waiting. Not from Lauren. From one of the victims. A woman in her late 70s. Widow. Former librarian. She wrote to thank me. Not for the arrest, not for the money, but for speaking up when others hadn't known how. She ended her letter with a line I've read more than once since. You reminded me that quiet people still matter. That night, sleep came easily. Deep. Undisturbed. In the weeks that followed, Michael made changes. Smaller apartment. Different city. He started teaching part-time at a community college, mentoring young engineers the way I once mentored kids with shaky hands and big ideas. He was lighter, not because the past was gone, but because it no longer owned him. One afternoon, he called and said, "I think I'm okay now." I believed him. I still sit on my porch most evenings. Same chair. Same view. Kids ride bikes past my house like the future doesn't know it's fragile. Maybe that's how it should be. Sometimes people ask if I regret staying quiet as long as I did. No. Silence isn't surrender. It's a season. And when it ends, it leaves behind something stronger than noise ever could. The winter after the trial was gentle. Not warm, not kind exactly, but gentle in the way an old dog settles beside you without needing to be called. Mornings came slower. Light lingered longer on the porch rail before moving on. I found myself fixing small things around the house that had waited years for attention. A loose hinge. A stubborn drawer. Work without urgency feels different. It's not about finishing. It's about restoring. Michael visited less often, and that was a good sign. He was building a life again, one not defined by what had been taken from him. We spoke every Sunday, same as always. Some habits don't break. They anchor. One evening, he told me he'd started seeing someone. Not serious, he said. Just coffee. Conversation. I'm paying attention this time, he added, almost apologetic. You always did, I replied. You just trusted the wrong signals. He laughed softly. The sound told me more than his words. As for Lauren, sentencing came quietly. No spectacle. No last speech worth remembering. Years, not months. Enough time for consequences to become routine. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard. Just closure. Justice doesn't need applause. I donated the cedar jewelry box I'd started carving to a local craft school. It wasn't meant for an anniversary anymore. But wood doesn't care why it's shaped. Only that it is. Letting it go felt right. People think endings come with clarity. They don't. They come with space. Room for the mind to stop circling old questions. Room for peace to take root without asking permission. I still think of Linda, especially on quiet nights when the air carries her memory like perfume you can't quite place. I tell her about Michael, about how he's standing taller now, about how we did right by him, even when it hurt. The roses survived another season, still leaning, still undecided about the sun. Some things don't need correcting. One afternoon, a neighbor asked if I'd ever tell the full story publicly. Write it down. Put it somewhere permanent. I thought about that. About how truth doesn't always need a larger stage. No, I said finally. The people who needed to hear it already have. That night, I slept with the windows cracked, listening to the neighborhood breathe. Peace, I've learned, doesn't announce itself. It just stays. And when it does, you don't chase it. You protect it. I don't think about Lauren much anymore. That surprised me when I realized it. For a long time, I assumed her shadow would linger. That betrayal, once uncovered, would demand a permanent corner of the mind. But time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges if you let it. Not erasing, just softening enough so you don't cut yourself every time you reach back. What I think about now are smaller things. The sound Michael makes when he laughs without checking himself first. The way the porch boards warm under the sun by mid-afternoon. How the lemon trees look after a good rain. Leaves rinsed clean like they've been forgiven for something they never did. Michael came by last month with a woman named Claire. Nothing flashy. School counselor. Kind eyes. She asked about the workshop, listened when I talked about joints and grain like it mattered. That told me enough. When they left, Michael hugged me longer than usual. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For showing me what strength actually looks like. After they drove off, I sat in my chair and let that settle. Fathers spend their lives hoping their children turn out better than they did. Sometimes the best you can do is show them how to stand back up without becoming bitter. I never got the cedar jewelry box finished, though it still sits on the shelf, patient. Maybe I'll make something else out of it someday. Or maybe I won't. Not every piece needs an ending to have value. People still ask if I do anything differently. No, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about containment. About stopping harm without becoming it. About choosing dignity when outrage would have been easier and louder. I've learned that justice doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like quiet alignment, the world clicking back into place without ceremony. No fireworks, just a steady return to balance. These days, sleep comes easily. Peace sits in my chest like a warm stone. And when I look back, I don't see a man who was fooled. I see a man who loved his son enough to be patient, precise, and present when it mattered most. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. Truly. If you're walking through something similar, remember this. Patience isn't weakness, silence isn't surrender, and dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it over. If you'd like to hear more stories told this way, quietly, honestly, you're welcome to stay. Subscribe if you want. Leave a comment if you feel like it. And wherever you're listening from, I hope you find a little peace tonight. That's all I have to say, and that's enough.